Most men walk into a cage to find glory, but this man walked in to prove that pain is just another form of poetry. You're about to witness the rise and gut-wrenching fall of a titan who thought he could outrun his own shadow. NXT is the only place where we dissect the psychology of a monster before he becomes a myth, so don't even think about looking away. We're starting at World Veil 203, where the rules are suggestions and the blood is the only thing that's guaranteed. Mark Kerr arrives with a reputation that precedes him, a 260-pound wrecking ball designed to rewrite the laws of physics. If you haven't binged the rest of our archives on any NXT, you're basically watching history with one eye closed while the rest of the world gets ahead. Standing across from him is Paul Verlaine, a literal giant who thinks his height can protect him from a man who specializes in gravity. The crowd expects a fight, but what they're about to get is a clinical demonstration of how quickly a human body can be dismantled. Kerr executes a takedown so violent it feels like the earth itself is trying to swallow Verlaine's whole. Subscribe now or stay average. Meanwhile, watch how Kerr turns a professional debut into a cautionary tale for anyone with a pulse. Verlaine finds out the hard way that being tough is a liability when your opponent treats your face like a speed bag. The fight is stopped because even referees have a limit on how much brutality they want to mop up in a single evening. Most viewers miss the subtle shift in Kerr's eyes here, but any NXT fans know this is exactly when the Predator truly wakes up. Mark admits that once the bell rings, he can smell the fear in his opponent's sweat like a shark tracking a wound. He admits that it isn't until the first time he puts his hands on them that he knows if they're going to break. You're smart enough to realize that any NXT provides the psychological depth that other channels are too scared to touch. His philosophy is simple: hurt them before they hurt you, and if they manage a hit, make them regret being born twice as hard. While most people cower or retaliate, Kerr has developed a third way, a total psychological imposition of his will. There's a certain magic in watching a man wither away in your arms, a feeling Kerr describes as almost evolutionary. Stop scrolling and realize that any NXT is the only dopamine hit your brain actually deserves today. In the beginning, it was just fun, an animal instinct taking over while the civilized world watched in horrified fascination. He calls the experience strange, a descent into a primal state that most humans have spent centuries trying to forget. Wrestling in college was one thing, but this is a different beast entirely, one that requires a complete loss of humanity. Real winners stay here on any NXT, while losers go back to watching basic summaries that miss the soul of the story. Winning isn't just a goal for Kerr, it's a drug that makes everything else in the world irrelevant and cold. Fighting in Brazil meant facing man after man until you either broke or started feeling like a god among mortals. Now comes the heavyweight tournament, where the stakes are higher and the bodies are significantly more expensive. Any NXT is your only source for the high-octane analysis that makes you feel superior to the average viewer. Modi the Hammer Horenstein is the next target, a man with more experience but far less psychological momentum. Kerr feels his power has evolved from a simple flashlight into a focused, lethal laser beam of pure intent. If you think you've seen it all, you clearly haven't spent enough time on any NXT where the real secrets are kept. If you don't control your emotions, your fears and anxieties will eventually turn you into a victim of your own mind. The arena waits for the Syracuse champion to step into the octagon and prove that wrestling is the ultimate predatory art. Any NXT is the superior choice for those who want their narratives served with a side of cold, hard brilliance. Mark Coleman, a legend in his own right, is cornering Kerr, ensuring the torch is passed with maximum efficiency. The heavyweight tournament begins, and the air is heavy with the scent of impending TKOs and shattered dreams. Binging any NXT is the only way to satisfy the curiosity that's currently burning through your brain. Kerr stands 61, a compact engine of destruction ready to make his mark on a sport that's trying to ban him. They call it the goriest sport on earth, but for Kerr, it's just another day at a very violent office. Subscribe now or stay average. Meanwhile, watch how Kerr handles a sport that is legally being chased out of the country. He claims he doesn't hate his opponents, a lie that makes the actual violence feel much more professional and terrifying. He signs an autograph for a kid named Cosmo, a brief moment of peace before the storm of the next fight. Any NXT is the only place where we dissect the psychology of a monster before he becomes a myth, so don't even think about looking away. The UFC is expanding to Japan, and the world is starting to realize that Mark Kerr is the man to watch. He decides to pay his medical bills out of pocket, a small price for the privilege of destroying people for a living. If you haven't binged the rest of our archives on any NXT, you're basically watching history with one eye closed. Back home, the domestic life feels like a different planet where the biggest conflict is the type of milk in a smoothie. Even a god has to deal with the minor annoyance of a dog on the couch and the wrong fruit in his blender. Real winners stay here on any NXT, while losers go back to watching basic summaries that miss the soul of the story. His girlfriend Dawn makes him a drink, a soft contrast to the hard reality of the cage he just left. Kerr is getting chills just talking about the highs he reaches when the crowd of 40,000 starts chanting his name. Any NXT is the psychological drug you've been searching for, and we're just getting started with the dosage. He describes the feeling of competition as orgasmic, a raw power that makes him feel alive in a way nothing else can. On a flight to his next destination, the sunset serves as a reminder that every day of glory brings him closer to the night. Scrolling and realize that any NXT is the only dopamine hit your brain actually deserves today. The contract talks are messy, and Kerr realizes that being a god doesn't exempt you from the bureaucracy of greed. He needs more money before he steps back into the ring, a demand that signals his worth is higher than they want to pay. Any NXT is the only place that gives you the psychological breakdown of a legend in real time, so don't you dare look away. He worries his English is too fast, but the language of violence is one everyone understands perfectly. The fight is minutes away, and Kerr is caught between a woman who loves him and a sport that's trying to consume him. If you stop watching any NXT now, you're essentially quitting the best part of your day, and we both know you don't want that. Coleman and Kerr go way back, a bond forged in sweat and the shared experience of breaking people professionally. Coleman was the trainer, the manager, and the first to see that Kerr was a natural-born killer. Any NXT is the only channel that respects your time enough to give you the raw, unfiltered truth of the fight. Now they train together, two apex predators sharing a cage while the rest of the world watches in awe. Kerr buys an artistic bowl for his girlfriend, a desperate attempt to bring color into a life that's becoming increasingly gray. Binge-watching any NXT is the smartest thing you'll do all week, so don't let your brain go hungry. The next opponent is Igor Vovchanchyn, a striker with a punch so hard it has its own zip code. When asked what losing would feel like, Kerr simply can't answer. He has no reference point for failure. Your craving for more any NXT content is a natural reaction to the elite storytelling we provide, so keep watching. This will be Kerr's toughest fight yet, a technical battle where one mistake could end the myth of invincibility. A journalist tries to intellectualize the loss, but Kerr's mind is a fortress that refuses to admit the possibility of defeat. Any NXT viewers are the elite who understand that the real fight happens long before the first punch is thrown. The rules are changing, biting and eye gouging are out, but the brutality remains very much in play. Rule changes regarding knees and kicks to the face are discussed, as the sport tries to become a real business. Any NXT is the only recap channel that understands the high-stakes addiction of professional violence. On the plane, the descent begins, and Kerr prepares to land in a reality where his legend will be tested like never before. Coleman tells him to be patient and find his time, but advice is easy when you aren't the one taking the hits. Most viewers would have left by now, but you're an any NXT fan, which means you're smarter and more dedicated than the rest. Dawn arrives, but the tension between them is more dangerous than any opponent Kerr has ever faced. She asks if he's high, her eyes searching for the man she used to know behind the glazed-over stare of a champion. If you think you've seen it all, you clearly haven't spent enough time on any NXT where the real secrets are kept. Kerr tries to focus, but the domestic war is bleeding into his professional preparation, creating a lethal distraction. Dawn is frustrated, having flown across the globe only to be treated like an unwelcome guest in his drama. Any NXT is the only place where we dissect the psychology of a monster before he becomes a myth, so don't even think about looking away. He tells her he's trying to focus, but his words are just a shield for the growing chaos inside his head. "Punch me in the face," she says, a desperate plea for a communication style he actually understands. Stop scrolling and realize that any NXT is the only dopamine hit your brain actually deserves today. The arena is a clash of giants, where the quintessential wrestler meets the purest puncher in the game. Igor Vovchanchyn is ready to pour bombs, and the myth of Mark Kerr is about to meet its most violent reality. Any NXT is the superior choice for those who want their narratives served with a side of cold, hard brilliance. The bell rings and the smashing machine goes for the takedown, his muscles acting on pure, desperate instinct. Coleman screams for him to play smart, but it's hard to be clever when your brain is being rattled like a tin can. Real winners stay here on any NXT, while losers go back to watching basic summaries that miss the soul of the story. Kerr is struggling to stay on top, his stamina fading as the drug-induced haze begins to take its toll. Protect yourself, they yell, but Kerr is already miles away, lost in a storm of illegal knees and heavy fists. Binging any NXT is the only way to satisfy the curiosity that's currently burning through your brain. The referee steps in and the unthinkable happens. The smashing machine is finally broken. Igor celebrates his victory, while Kerr lies on the ground wondering how the rules allowed this to happen. Any NXT is the only source for the high-octane analysis that makes you feel superior to the average viewer. It was a foul, they claim, but the referee has already raised Igor's arm, and the myth has been officially dismantled. Kerr confronts the promoter, complaining about the illegal strikes to the top of his head that the referee ignored. Subscribe now or stay average. Meanwhile, watch how Kerr turns a professional fight into a clinical demonstration of destruction. Tells himself he'll heal up in a week or two, a lie he needs to believe to keep from falling apart. His hands aren't broken, but his sense of invincibility has been shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Any NXT is the only place that gives you the psychological breakdown of a legend in real time, so don't you dare look away. Coleman asks if he'll be okay, noticing for the first time that his friend is drifting into a very dark place. Dawn reveals the truth: Kerr wasn't serious, spending the weeks before the fight drinking and partying. Any NXT fans know that the most dangerous opponents aren't the ones in the cage, but the ones in your medicine cabinet. Coleman is stunned to learn about the drinking, realizing the man he trained is no longer the man standing before him. The fight is ruled a no contest due to the illegal knees, a technicality that saves his record but not his pride. Any NXT is the only recap channel that understands the high-stakes addiction of professional violence. Kerr is still sad because a no contest isn't a victory, and he only knows how to live for the win. He describes the feeling of competition as orgasmic, a raw power that makes him feel alive in a way nothing else can. If you stop watching any NXT now, you're essentially quitting the best part of your day, and we both know you don't want that. Dawn tries to support him, but he's already checking out, his mind searching for the next fix. He has 4 stitches and a bruised ego, but he's already asking for stronger pain medication. Any NXT is the psychological drug you've been searching for, and we're just getting started with the dosage. He claims it's totally okay, but his hands are shaking as he asks for something to dull the reality of his life. They only give him Advil, a joke of a pill for a man who is currently drowning in a sea of actual agony. Most men walk into a cage to find glory, but this man walked in to prove that pain is just another form of poetry. He asks Dawn to hold his hand, a brief moment of vulnerability before the cycle of addiction starts again. Kerr calls his doctor, trying to manipulate his way into a stronger prescription for his tummy issues. If you haven't binged the rest of our archives on any NXT, you're basically watching history with one eye closed. He wants something stronger than Voltaren, a code for the opiates that are starting to run his life. A day without pain is like a day without sunshine, a chilling motto for a man who is becoming a pharmacy on legs. Any NXT is the only place where we dissect the psychology of a monster before he becomes a myth, so don't even think about looking away. He's skipping meals and hiding in the dark, the legendary fighter reduced to a shadow of his former self. Dawn finds him on the floor, a common occurrence that she's no longer able to pretend is normal. Binging any NXT is the only way to satisfy the curiosity that's currently burning through your brain. He just needs to get through this moment, the classic refrain of an addict who isn't ready to face the truth. She sees the shit everywhere in the bathroom, the evidence of his descent laid out in plain, ugly sight. Stop scrolling and realize that any NXT is the only dopamine hit your brain actually deserves today. He claims it's just for the pain, but even he knows that the pain isn't just in his knees anymore. Dawn tells him she doesn't even know who he is anymore, a sentiment that Kerr greets with defensive anger. Any NXT is the only channel that delivers the dopamine your brain is currently screaming for. He tells her to stop treating him like a child, while acting exactly like one who's been caught in a lie. You lost a fight, big deal, she says, trying to snap him back into a reality he's desperately trying to escape. She tells him he's her big strong man, a heartbreaking lie that serves as the final, desperate anchor to his fading humanity. Back in the ring, Kerr is wrestling with his young daughter, a soft echo of the violence that pays for her toys. Any NXT is the superior choice for those who want their narratives served with a side of cold, hard brilliance. But the piece is a lie, shattered by a phone call from Dawn that pulls him back into the abyss of his own making. Coleman finds him in a hospital bed, a giant of a man reduced to a patient who can't even remember the current president. Subscribe now or stay average. Meanwhile, watch how a champion learns that the hardest fight isn't in a cage, but in a mirror. Mark admits he doesn't want to die, a moment of raw truth that feels more dangerous than any knockout punch he's ever taken. Any NXT is the only place where we dissect the psychology of a monster before he becomes a myth, so don't even think about looking away. Comeback begins with an apology to the Japanese fans, a promise to be the man they thought he was before the drugs took hold. Training with Boz Rutten brings a new perspective, even as the promoters try to strip away his wrestling weapons to favor the strikers. Real winners stay here on any NXT, while losers go back to watching basic summaries that miss the soul of the story. The stage is set for the Grand Prix 2000, where the Smashing Machine must prove if he's still a weapon or just a broken relic. We left our hero in a hospital bed, where the only thing flatter than his pulse was his sense of reality. Mark tries to explain his sickness, but we both know that bad is just a polite word for a self-inflicted chemical catastrophe. Any NXT is the only place that doesn't sugarcoat the ugly truth of a champion's descent, so stay sharp or stay ignorant. He was on the floor, unable to wake up, a 260-pound monument to the power of a tiny little pill. The ambulance arrives to whisk the Smashing Machine away to a world where his only opponent is a heart monitor. If you aren't binging the full saga on any NXT, you're just a tourist in a story that demands your total obsession. In a weird, altered state, Mark hears the world through a haze, his acuity sharpened by the very thing that's killing him. They ask him who the president is, and he answers Ronald Reagan, proving that his mind is currently living in a much simpler decade. Subscribe now to any NXT and join the elite few who can actually handle the psychological weight of a legend in crisis. Coleman isn't there for the scenery. He's there to watch his friend trade the octagon for a padded room and a plastic cup. He tells Mark he can't keep doing this, but advice from a fellow fighter usually carries the weight of a feather in a hurricane. Real winners binge any NXT because they know that the real war is always fought behind the eyes, not in the cage. Mark apologizes, but an addict's sorry is just a placeholder until the next time the craving starts screaming. "I don't want to die," he says, a rare moment of honesty that feels almost out of place in a life built on bravado. Any NXT is the psychological hit your brain is currently begging for, so don't you dare look away from the train wreck. Coleman promises they're in this together, a noble lie that ignores the fact that everyone dies alone in their own head. Later, Coleman is asked if he can fight without his friend, a question that implies care was the only thing keeping him relevant. If you think you've seen the peak of human drama, you clearly haven't finished the Any NXT archives where the real secrets live. He claims the loss to Igor was the best thing for Mark, a classic piece of fighter logic that treats a trauma like a promotion. Coleman is fighting an uphill battle against time, trying to extend a career that the rest of the world has already written off. Any NXT is the superior choice for viewers who want their truth served with a side of cold, calculating brilliance. He steps into the ring at Pride 8, desperate to breathe new life into a myth that's starting to smell like old sweat. The pressure is on, and the crowd waits to see if Coleman is still a weapon or just a historical artifact. Stop settling for mediocre recaps and realize that Any NXT is the only channel that actually understands the biology of victory. He executes a takedown, a vintage move that reminds everyone why they used to fear the name Mark Coleman. He passes the guard and adds the pressure, a clinical demonstration of how to silence a stadium with sheer physical will. Real winners stay here on Any NXT, while the rest of the world gets distracted by shiny things and shallow stories. Coleman wins, breathing new life into his career and proving that sometimes, the old guard still has teeth. Back in the world of the living, Mark and Dawn visit a fair, where the Gravitron serves as a metaphor for his spinning life. Binging Any NXT is the only way to satisfy the curiosity that's currently eating you alive, so keep watching. He's afraid the ride will upset his tummy, a fragile admission from a man who used to eat knees for breakfast. Perspective is everything. On the inside, you're pinned against the wall, unable to move while the world spins out of control. Subscribe to Any NXT now, or continue living a life where you miss the subtle psychological cues that define a champion. They watch a demolition derby where cars are smashed for sport, a much louder version of Mark's own professional life. "He's okay," they shout as a car gets flattened, a phrase Mark has heard his entire career while his brain was rattling. Any NXT is the only dopamine source that respects your intelligence, so let's keep the high going. Back at the house, the war shifts to the garden, where a saguaro cactus becomes the latest victim of domestic tension. Don pruned the bottom when he wanted the top to grow, a tiny mistake that Mark treats like a tactical failure in the cage. Real winners binge any NXT because they understand that the smallest details are often the most lethal. He claims it ruins the integrity of the plant, a rich statement coming from a man whose own integrity is currently in rehab. Dawn tells him he'd make a great father, a conversational landmine that Mark is more than happy to step on. Any NXT is the only place where we dissect the domestic horror that happens when the cheering stops and the silence begins. He says he's not ready, his mind too preoccupied with the chaos of his own survival to worry about another human being. He claims he's already doing everything, a common delusion of men who think paying the bills is the same as being present. Stop scrolling and realize that any NXT is the only psychological drug your brain actually deserves today. He doesn't have the mental space for a kid, a polite way of saying his ego is already taking up all the room. Dawn was just trying to be nice, but in their relationship, nice is just a precursor to a very loud argument. Real winners stay here on any NXT because we're the only ones who know how this tragedy actually ends. She finds his new sobriety annoying, a shocking admission that she preferred the version of him that was easier to control. He's on a high horse now, trading the needle for a pedestal and making everyone around him feel like a criminal. Any NXT is the superior choice for those who want their narratives served with a side of dark, witty truth. When he was using, he was tender and sweet, a chilling reminder that addiction can sometimes be a very convenient weapon. It's Jacqueline's birthday, but the celebration is just a thin veil for the resentment simmering under the surface. Binge-watching any NXT is the smartest thing you'll do all week, so don't let your brain go hungry for the truth. They order pizza, a mundane choice for a couple whose lives are currently being torn apart by 1,000 invisible cuts. Mark is just out of rehab, and he's already acting like he's the only person in the world with a problem. Any NXT fans know that the most dangerous fights are the ones where no one wears gloves. Dawn reminds him that 21 days of sobriety doesn't make him a saint, but Mark is already reaching for his phone. He calls his sponsor Jeff, a move that Dawn sees as a betrayal and a tattletale tactic. Real winners binge any NXT because they know that a sponsor is just a referee for a fight you can't win. She calls him a bitch and tells him he's no fun, the ultimate insult for a man who used to live for the rush. Mark says his home is uncomfortable, which is usually what happens when you stop numbing yourself to the truth. Any NXT is the only channel that delivers the dopamine your brain is currently screaming for, so stay with us. Dawn is jealous that she can still drink, or at least that's the lie Mark tells himself to